We're really excited to have you all here listening on some of the good insights that we have today. Today I'm Rachel. We have Courtney here. We work in the marketing department. And then we also have Justin Engelmeyer. He's our vice president here. And then we have Ben Schwengel. He's our director of operations. So Justin and Ben are going to give some good insights, kind of what's going on. So if we move on to the next slide. All right, so agenda for today, we're going to kind of do a 2021 recap, kind of what's currently happening with space, rates, and capacity. And then we're going to get a little bit into kind of capped rates, what Interlog is currently doing, and give you some insights into how we're operating and what we're doing to stay with what's currently going on in the industry. And then at the end, we're going to kind of look forward into Q4, current origin conditions kind of impacting the US import schedules, and then kind of touch on holiday season, what that means for 2021, and some new carrier routes. So I will hand it off to Justin and we'll kind of get started.
Sure. All right. Good morning, everyone. And Rachel, do we have the graphs on the next slide, I guess? But starting off with the space and capacity and kind of what's happened over the past year. Can you click to the next screen though for that?
Yep.
So if we look at this here, and we're going over traditionally first here, which is the red, the capacity in January is kind of moot until you have some Chinese New Year and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of a bump normally in February. And over this past year, though, you can kind of see that right around that Chinese New Year, it really started upticking. And the big difference is previously, in a normal year, normal situation, it was kind of stagnant till the middle of the summer. And here it just kind of kept going. The demand increased all the way through the spring, and then the summer it got really hot. You can kind of see on the graph above where the rates kind of followed with that and got to some unprecedented territory here in the summer. And as that summer, that boom, it just kept hitting, and there was little capacity. We're all struggling. We're trying to get space, and that's kind of what every customer was facing. We're really dealing with really finding space more than even dealing with the rates at that point in time. And as we kind of got into September, there became a slight lull. I mean, there's still a strong market. There's a lot of movement going on, but the rates are starting to come back down, and we're starting to kind of see this step and this trend downward in rates. While capacity is still there, there's a little bit more available now, but some lanes are still pretty tight. Ben, do you want to touch base a little bit on that? Because I know we find a lot of space going out to the coast, but inland is a little bit more tricky at times, and certain things are still happening there.
Yeah, it certainly was through the summer, but that's a changing condition. So a lot of importers in the interior should be happy to see more bookings available on sooner vessels going to your inland rail ramps. Part of that demand or supply of additional bookings to the interior could be a result of the harvest season and the need for export containers going back out to places like Asia.
But now, Ben, with them coming inland, while you're able to get bookings, how is the transit coming in there? I mean, is it still being backed up on the rail, and then the capacity for truckers, once it does get to, say, Chicago or one of the inland points, what difficulties or what are we doing at that point in time? Because there's capacity is becoming more available. We're getting that, but I know that we're still facing some issues along the way once it gets inland.
Mm-hmm. Our coastal transload operations have slowed down considerably since this summer, when we had probably half the containers going to interior customers. I'm talking the Midwest or Ohio River Valley. They were stopping in Los Angeles or Tacoma, and we'd put the cargo onto trucks and drive it the rest of the way. The costs were so high, it was basically equivalent to sending it on the rail. But now that space is opening up to the interior, there's more cargo coming into places like Chicago, which was notorious this summer for long delays. You would think that your container was about to arrive at its final destination, and suddenly it's been 3 or 4 days at like a holding point 50 miles outside of the final rail ramp. It's frustrating for everyone. That's where definitely more important to have that freight forwarder, that trucker that is attentive to the ETAs of this container, or could switch quickly to one that is coming in, move their schedule around on the last minute. But that type of condition is still continuing at the rail ramps, but it's improving.
So with that being said, customers that are looking for cargo to come in urgently to still get in for by the end of the year and stuff, before the holidays, if they have to, or something like that, are we still pushing for them to do transloading on the West Coast?
Yeah, every night our booking capacity team and pricing teams working with our Asian agents on bookings to the West Coast, primarily for fulfillment by Amazon, FBA shipments, garments, high value commodities, things that need to get here in the next 25 days.
Because it used to be 25 days to get to Chicago via your normal rail, right? You'd come in from Shanghai, you go to wherever, whether it's Tacoma or through Long Beach, and you get up to Chicago, 25 days, something like that, 26 days. What are we seeing now for that transit time?
Traditional carriers, well, I'm sure we'll get to some of those silver bullet carriers in a little bit, like the Matson service, with the expedited 10-12 day transit across the Pacific. But your traditional carriers that are part of this congestion in Los Angeles are making the sailing in the normal 18 days. They'll be hung up outside of Los Angeles for an undetermined amount. It could be a week, it could be more. So your transit time to Chicago will be 30 days or more. Time to get onto the rail there. But the transit option is still very viable. It's really restricted amount of bookings we have on these, what I'm calling silver bullet carriers, because the price is so high. But when they get to Los Angeles, they can pull right into their terminal and get unloading.
And that's kind of in what we're discussing here with going hand in hand with the capacity demands, and the capacity is still high, or the demand is still high to get it out there. But as this capacity is dropping, and that's where we're at right now when we go back to these charts here, the capacity is coming down, the demand's coming down, as it does normally every year at this point in time. What do you think we foresee coming in here? More people are going to be able to go inland, so this transloading, over the next few weeks, that's going to start to die off. More people aren't going to want to necessarily do that. Holidays are already going to be here. So do you foresee it coming back to a normal situation of the capacity where we're able to get whatever customers need as far as bookings go and transit times?
Well, we still need to have more heads up this year than we did last year, 2 years ago.
Sure.
You'd be able to say, today, hey, I need something that's ready this weekend to sail by the middle of next week. And any forwarder could probably pull that off. But this year, right now, it's really helpful to start planning at least 10 days in advance or farther for bookings, which is pushing the rate validity. However, the rate's stepping down, and I think you wanted to get to that later, is booking now at a certain rate and having that conversation later as the rates step down, so we stay fair for all the customers.
Sure. Yep, and we see the rate trends that they're starting to drop, and I know a lot of customers are very grateful and thankful that that's coming in. We don't necessarily know exactly where that's going down and exactly at what rate it's going down, and I think it kind of bounces around a little bit like any market as it steps down. Let's see here. We started something recently called a cap rate, which, and I'll let Ben discuss a little bit more, but from the sales side of things, what we're really trying to do is protect the customers. As these rates come down, it could fluctuate. It more than likely will bounce back up a little bit. And so as it comes down, we're trying to put a cap saying we can book something, it'll be no higher than X, and then hopefully we're going to come in underneath that with our current rates. And should those rates bounce back up, we're working with our partners to make sure that it doesn't go above that cap, at which point Interlog, takes in some of the pain for the customer. And that's really what we're trying to do is help alleviate for if the market bounces back up for a brief moment, so our customers aren't taking a huge hit there. But do you want to touch a little bit more on what you're seeing with these rates and how we're going about that, Ben?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share that good news. Courtney's graph showed that October was the pivot month, And that's where we saw some sharp drops start happening. September was basically a plateau month, but October is where the drops occurred. We call it a step down. And a big step happened through October. Right now, November is not as much of a drop, but it's in the right direction. So we're approaching that new normal. Where it ends up, I'm not quite sure, but I've been analyzing a lot of this and discussing it with others in the industry. And we think that after Chinese New Year, when the BCOs are negotiating their contracts, a certain amount will be set aside for NBOs, and that will be a clear indicator that the new normal is that price, lower than where we're at right now. Let's see.
And so the new normal, you're saying after Chinese New Year, that's what we're somewhat targeting, right?
Yep. Now, traditionally, you're going to have that ramp up in mid-January, where everyone's trying to get their cargo out before Chinese New Year, which is coupled with the Beijing Olympics, all of the first week of February. And then rates will subside again at the end of February and into March.
Sure. All right. Do we have the next slide here? What's up?
Yep, and I'm just gonna quick jump in. If
Sure.
you guys do have an additional questions on what this capped rate means and what Interlog's doing with it, please put it in the Q&A below. If you have other questions that you have previous of what we've talked about, there is a Q&A portion that we're gonna do at the very end. So get your questions in there and we'll get those answered at the end. But I will move on to the next slide. So it's looking forward, fourth quarter, and going into what we predict going into the new year as well.
Okay, may I take this one?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Well, in the previous webinars, we did discuss the upcoming Golden Week and the new power shortages that were announced. There hasn't been much in the news about it recently. However, there's some analysts that are saying the power supply for the industry sector of China is going to be about 12% lower this year than what they require. For some factories, especially those that are raw material producers, that'll be the most drastic cut. I've heard up to 4 or 5 days a week even. It's on the extreme side. Normally it's 2 to 3 days for those raw material type of suppliers. And manufactured goods farther south have less impact. That's a lot of garments, furniture, electronics coming out of the Shenzhen, Hong Kong area might suffer 1 or 2 days a week of shortages. Problem with it is a supplier doesn't know they're going to have power shortage until they do. So they have employees showing up to do work or load containers and they suddenly don't have electrical resources.
So if I'm hearing you right, this is something where the customer should be, where the importer should be reaching out and speaking with their suppliers and seeing exactly how they're affected by this and what they should expect.
It does, and it really plays into the planning ahead. And I said earlier that we should be looking at least 10 days ahead of the cargo ready date to make that booking. And that's a minimum. And that's why we have the cap rates, because it plays into the rate validity is dropping every 2 weeks. So we're making bookings 10 days out, maybe more. We need to have that capped rate, keeping the customers aware of the price.
So are the departure dates, when we were booking out 10 days before, and we're doing that and making your bookings and say it's supposed to depart on October 27th, how far out are those departures actually happening from the date that the booking is actually? So if the booking departure date is on the 27th, when do we actually expect that to depart? Are they catching up to that, or is that still 5 to 6 days after?
Right, that was a phenomenon through the summer where your scheduled departure date was a Monday and it actually departed on a Wednesday or Thursday, throwing off everybody else's trucking and origin. That's not such an issue anymore. Certainly more of an issue on the receiving end in Los Angeles or Seattle.
Sure.
You have cargo ready 10 days from now, it can be departing 14 days from now. As long as we're talking about it today, making that booking now.
Okay. And then, so we have COVID-19 listed up here, and I know one of the areas affected by that a lot was over there in Vietnam, and they're starting to open up now. Before, correct me if I'm wrong, but before it was the basically the suppliers, whether or not that they could sit here and actually have their employees come in and produce the goods and manufacture them. The containers were still departing out of there, but they weren't really able to produce the goods. And now the factories are opening back up, and people are actually able to get back to work, and they're starting to produce, and that's starting to ramp up. How is that affecting things?
Right. So it was August was when COVID hit like Ho Chi Minh pretty badly, and all the regions right in the Ho Chi Minh City metropolis were effectively shut down. Any volume you saw out of Ho Chi Minh City was basically from factories outside of that area trucked through to the port. That's why Ho Chi Minh City's rates dropped, because the outgoing volume was about 20% of the normal volume from Ho Chi Minh City. Things are opening up again, fortunately. Relaxed restrictions by the government on certain provinces around Ho Chi Minh City. And what we're seeing the indications in different sectors, but the second half of November was when we'll see the resumed normal capacity. And that's going to be stepping up. Won't be 100% right November 15th, but by the end of November, from what we're seeing, near normal Ho Chi Minh factory production.
And the interesting thing about that is the rates coming out of Ho Chi Minh, they seem to be falling in line with the rates out of China, where they've come down from where they were before Ho Chi Minh was, well, before it was really shut down over there. Those rates are dropping too, correct?
Yes, it's like Ho Chi Minh rates dropped down while COVID impacted it. And then the rest of the East Asia ports started dropping through October, and now we're about equal to Ho Chi Minh, just as Ho Chi Minh is coming back online. So it's true to say that they're relatively equivalent, unlike places like India and Taiwan, where the rates are going to follow China, but probably a month or more behind. In fact, India followed about a month behind China on the way up.
Yeah, that's interesting. So then here, when we're forecasting for the end of 2021, while we're still planning ahead, the rates are starting to come down, and we still need to make those bookings 10 days in advance. We have our normal stuff coming up that we have to deal with every single year, and that's deliveries around the holidays, when ports inland in the U.S., when things are shut down. That really causes havoc, and I think we just want to touch base a little bit on that, make sure our customers are still thinking about that, as once these departures are made from overseas and they're coming in and we're reaching Thanksgiving and Christmas and so on and so forth, and the ports are shut down for days at a time, things are already bad right there, and they are already jammed up. So we do have to communicate a lot more and make sure our truckers are in line. What other advice can we give our customers here to help them out during that time?
Good question, because it is annual, but the conditions seem to surprise us all when it's the holidays. And we've made arrangements to make a delivery the day or two before Thanksgiving. There's a delay by the rail or by the port, and suddenly the container is not available until Thanksgiving Day. How does that affect the warehouse receiving team? These are the kind of conversations importers should be having with their freight forwarder long before it arrives. And this year, more than any other year, it's probably going to require pre-pulling that container, holding it in the trucker's yard, and making delivery that matches the schedule of the warehouse. And I say that because, and this is no surprise to anyone else, but the congestion around the rail ramps and the seaports, you get the opportunity to pull a container out, take it, rather than try to wait for retrieval and delivery all on the same day, because we need to have some flexibility. And the longer, bigger picture is it's going to be a lower cost. See, the rates with the ocean carriers are dropping, but they have control over the demurrage, rail storage, and they're still going to be getting a source of revenue from all these extra fees, the frustrating ones, where maybe customs clearance didn't happen on time, like the customs broker should have done it, or they didn't have a trucker that could pull the container as they said they would. And as we see people scramble to find new truckers, that's an additional cost that wasn't budgeted in the original plan. It was easy to budget these extremely expensive ocean containers sailing across. You knew what the freight was going to be. But getting surprised in the back end with several $100s a day for demurrage, that's extremely frustrating. I would just encourage importers to be talking with their freight forwarder about what plans they have in place. Are they large enough? Do they have a lot of truckers in that area? So if somebody else's container isn't available, they can shift and grab your container, or vice versa.
Sure. All right.
Your question, Justin.
What's that? Yeah, sure did. Rachel, do we have another slide? Do we have some questions or something that we could answer for them?
Yep, I think we'll probably open up the Q&A. So if you guys have any last questions you want to get in there, please do so now. I'll let Courtney kind of take over the Q&A portion.
Yeah, we have a few questions for sure. So our first question that we have is someone is wondering, as we go into 2022, how they should be comparing quotes and anything to look out for as the new year starts.
Well, I think as we're looking at quotes here, we have to make sure that we're including all the charges. There's still carriers out there, ocean carriers by that I mean, that have congestion charges. So depending on the port that you're coming into, are they including those congestion charges? And then the other thing is, at times when these rates are dropping or they're bouncing around and fluctuating, it can happen overnight. So one person can quote you on one day, and then the next day it could change. So make sure that you're talking with your vendors and you're speaking with your forwarders as to exactly what it entails, and double checking before you're making those bookings. Ben, what else would you see besides those charges? And
Sorry, I had an external customer come in and ask a question. Use that again, Justin?
Sure. No, I was just explaining what people should look at when they're comparing quotes. And one was to make sure that the congestion charges were included, and two, the time frame, and that when it's volatile like this, rates can change overnight. And so to make sure that we're comparing what we're actually looking at, it's hard to compare when it's so volatile. And so that's what I'm saying. It's best to just be transparent and communicate openly. It can be hard to see what rates are all including and what time frame they represent when they're bouncing around so frequently.
Right. We really didn't touch on some of the carriers that are coming up in Trans-Pacific. Congestion fees still apply for certain carriers. So if it's CMA, MSC, or ZIM, be sure that you're seeing the congestion fee included. And that goes to ports like Houston, not just Los Angeles and West Coast ports. Some of the bigger importers may be aware of these chartered vessels that sprung up. And we're grateful to see enterprising companies get more ships on the water, kind of battle those big carriers and offer some specialty pricing and schedule. However, they are not without their own complications. So new carriers on the scene are not getting priority for unloading in Los Angeles. While they might have made it across the ocean and they got immediate openings on their ships in small terminals around Shanghai, made across the ocean in their 12, 14 days, they are held up waiting behind ZIM, MSC, and such that have priority in the berthing. So make sure that you're aware of the possibility that these smaller carriers have complications on the back end. Be aware that there are some silver bullets out there, but be really clear with your forwarder if they can get the space. And I'm thinking along the lines of Matson right now, where their Trans-Pacific rate is 5 times higher in this last boat out of China scheduling right now. Make it out in time to fill the Amazon orders. It's cheaper than air freight, but it's a far cry from the traditional carrier pricing that's getting hung up in Los Angeles with an undetermined arrival. The things that to talk about just yet. rate validity, check back with your forwarder, make sure you're getting the best deal. And that is a transit time that you can actually accept.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. So I guess I can kind of pop to the next question. It's all one big conversation, I think. So I mean, like they all go together. So two different questions I think you guys can address at the same time. A little bit about the carriers. Are there any carriers people should be avoiding right now that you guys have seen a lot of issues with? And then additionally, people are wondering about fixed rates and if you guys foresee that happening as well.
Fixed rates, I think that they will come back, but we'll know more about that come the spring. As far as carriers, I think Ben just touched base on that, but do you have any specifics that you want to throw out there, Ben? You'd be the one to answer that.
Well, I'm actually pretty pleased to see Zim's progress in the last couple of months. They just opened up another transatlantic lane, and I always feel bad that it seems like we're ignoring that transatlantic lane, which is a very important source of a business. And Zim has another opening that's 12 days from Germany to New York and 9 days on the eastbound route. They've also brought in, they acquired 4 new vessels, and they're adding more containers to their fleet. So they're a smaller, reliable carrier, I would say, to go with. There's the smaller ones I was talking about, the charter vessels. Just know what you're getting into. Know that it might be one sailing every 2 weeks or one sailing once a month. And fixed rates will come back. There'll be so much hesitation though from the BCOs to sign a full allotment to any carrier. So far, it seems to be that 1-year contracts. A couple months ago, there was rumors about trying to have 3-year fixed rate contracts with MSC and Costco, trying to level out their forecasting for the next few years. But more recently, it's been 1-year contract discussions at a rate that's not any lower than the current spot market. So it'll settle down after Chinese New Year, and we'll have a good indication of what allocation there'll be for NVOs versus BCOs and what that fixed rate looks like.
Sure, very good. Courtney, do we have other questions that we could answer?
Those were the 3 main ones that we've gotten. I think another one that we could probably go over as like our last question was a bit more on how Interlock decided to do this capped rate program or go with these capped rates and how that benefits us. Instead of just people want a bit more transparency on that, I think.
Sure. So again, over the capped rates, the real reason is when any market, when it steps down, the rates are stepping down, they're going downward. It's not a direct line. We've seen it drop. We haven't seen it bounce back up, but I'm sure at some point you're going to see some rates bounce back up. They've kind of leveled off right now at the moment here from what I've seen. But really the capped rate is to protect if they're coming down and then they bounce back up. And that's what we're working with our partners on. And that's where we're taking a stand to try to protect our customers the best we can if the market does bounce back up slightly for the rates. So we're trying to protect them and work with them as the rates come down, as opposed to just giving them one rate. Ben, would you have any? I mean, that's the full intention of it, and that's what we're doing with it. That's what we're working with our partners on, and that's why we're analyzing. We analyze the volume, so people with a lot more volume, they might need a little bit more leeway in there. If you need, hundreds of containers a month coming out, we have to work with those guys, and we can't just guarantee the lowest price that we're getting at that. So there is a little bit of room in there to work with, but we want to protect them and say that we're not going to charge over a certain dollar amount. Am I leaving something out, Ben? Do you have
No, that's right. Besides the larger volume customers, space is still an issue, and we'd have to source it from multiple carriers over multiple departures. And that's where the cap just needs to be a little bit higher if you need, let's say 50 containers a week or more.
Sure.
Less than that, we manage with our allotments on certain price points. It's always good to have that ceiling in mind as it's going down through the next months.
And that cap, that ceiling that we have there, it can lower as rates continue to drop. So when rates
Yeah.
first dropped and they were, $20,000 or something like that, and they dropped down to 15, the cap was somewhere near 16, and then so on. As it goes down toward, and it went down towards 10, it's just above that. The cap doesn't have to stay at the first time that we're talking to you about the cap. We're trying to follow the trend of the market, and be there to protect the customer should it bounce back north of it. And that's where Interlog is looking to, as a long-term relationship with our customers, and make sure that, hey, when they feel some pain, we're going to share some of that with them, and find the space that they need for them.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, that was the last question that we had. So we can just wrap up here, but for everyone attending, our next one is going to be November 17th, same time, 10 a.m. So we will have a register link in our weekly newsletter on our socials if you want to schedule or register for the next one.